She had just finished a job for the guild, her pockets filled with the stolen treasures she had plucked from her unsuspecting prey. Sneaking had always come naturally to a Khajiit such as herself, but being a vampire made her practically undetectable. She weaved her way out of the house like a shadow and out to the streets of a silent Riften. No soul would know she was ever there. She quickly changed out of her nightingale armor and into her casual traveling garb. True, it did little to cover herself, but that was the good part of having a lush pelt. You sort of always had something on you. With her job for the night finished, the Khajiit Altmer turned her odd-colored eyes towards the solemn sight of Mistvale Keep. They lingered on the doorway that led to the prison. She had put it off for weeks now if she thought about it. The mysterious letter telling her to meet someone there had all but slipped her mind till yesterday, when she had stumbled upon the note while shifting through her knapsack. Perhaps, her voice came out like smooth honey, it's time I pay this friend of mine a visit. Tail swishing slowly, she began her silent walk towards the keep, with only her faithful dogs panting, breaking the night's silence as it followed obediently beside her. A number of curious gazes fell on her as she made her way up the keep. The guards posted nearby were tense, but made no effort to stop her. They knew who she was, knew of her power and influence in the Thieves' Guild, and therefore knew better than to interfere. Moonlight illuminated her silhouette when she met with the jailhouse sentry. She looked at him sparingly. "Everything's in order," the guard replied, opening the doors for her. She flicked her tail at her faithful hound. Stay, it meant, before heading in alone. A small whine was the last thing she heard before disappearing behind the doors. The Riften jailhouse was cleaner and fancier than most jails she had been in, which wasn't surprising given the fact that a Blackbriar resided in one of the cells. She supposed not even internment would keep a member of that family from enjoying privileges others could not. Azhu'ki's keen ears picked up on the sounds in the jail. Snores were the dominant sounds. Whether they belonged to the prisoners or guards was of little concern to her. But one sound, a voice, crisp and raspy, stood out. She followed it to a cell and looked, but not gawked, at the sight before her. It was kin, that she could see. A Cathay male of strong physique sat hunched over a table, dressed in the most modest of loin-clothing, and seemed to be in a deep conversation with a dragonfly in a jar. Even from behind cell bars, she could tell he was strong, noting the muscles that hid just beneath his fur. And what a pelt he had! Azhu'ki had never seen a Khajiit with blue fur before, or perhaps she had, but her amnesia would have stolen that memory anyhow, and so she could not help but ogle at the rare sight. In her gut she knew this was the sender of the mysterious note. Anticipation rippled up her back despite herself. She quickly waved a guard over. "Open the door." She did not even spare the man a glance. "Right away," the guard said. In seconds, the door barring her from this mysterious figure was gone, her fingers opening the cell with a rather loud creak. The sound made the blue Khajiit turn from his insect companion. His eyes met hers, and she saw how they widened in recognition. He sat straight in his chair as she sauntered over. "So," Azhu'ki said softly. She crossed her arms and examined him, looking him up and down casually with a look of drowsy interest. "You are the one who wrote the letter." The stranger nodded, his eyes never leaving hers, as he said, "Come to kill me at last, have you?" He let out a weak chuckle. "Thank the gods! I can bear the guilt no longer." Questions swirled about her mind like a storm at his words. Kill him? Had she known him before her amnesia? Had he wronged her? Was whatever he had done so bad that it ate at his conscience so voraciously that the relief in his eyes were justified? Despite the confusion in her mind, her face remained neutral, only slightly arcing a brow at him. "And why would I kill you?" she asked politely, her gaze softening ever so slightly. The blue Khajiit let out a wistful sigh. "You do not remember? That is my fault also," he said after a while. "I killed you." His ears drooped in shame. "Or at least I tried. I was your so-called friend, Inigo." Azhu'ki's blank stare only made the pain in the blue Khajiit's eyes deepen. He took a deep breath. "I see that I must relive the memories all over again. Very well, I will tell you." There were few times when Azhu'ki felt frustration. She took pride in being thick-skinned to the many cruelties and atrocities of her world, handling difficult situations with relative ease, all without spoiling her mood. She knew how to adapt, how to make the most of what she said. Despite this, there was one thing that always got her tail lashing in agitation: her past. Unlike the majority of folk who at least had faded images of days far gone in their head, the Khajiit Altmer's past lay blank in her mind like untouched parchment. Her amnesia was the only thing she could not seem to get around. She had tried many times to bring her memories back to her. All kinds of potions, scrolls, and questionable rituals bore no fruit to her. She seemed doomed to forever be incomplete in memory. On most days, her amnesia was pushed to the back of her mind, as she was too busy dealing with the now. It unsettled her, absolutely threw her off balance when something, or someone in this case, from her past appeared in her present. It was understandable then that her face scrunched up in confusion, tail lashing furiously, as Inigo recounted the times she had apparently shared with him. She could not recognize any of the events he described. Being paid mercenaries, journeying across the land, sharing stories in their shared tent, getting shot in the head with his arrow, they were all foreign to her mind. "I'm sorry, I don't remember any of this," was her pathetic reply. Her chest tightened, seeing the guilt etched across Inigo's face. She did not remember this Khajiit, but she could sympathize with him. If she had done what he had supposedly done to her, she'd probably be ridden with remorse too. She must have been very close to him if the sadness in his gaze had anything to say. The blue Khajiit let out another sigh. "I see. I have badly wronged you, my friend," he said. "You had offered me friendship, and I gave you an arrow to the head. I thought I killed you." Azhu'ki offered a small smile. "Well, you mustn't be as skilled an archer as you say you are. I'm right here, aren't I?" she joked. A shadow of a smile breathed upon the blue Khajiit's maw at that. "This is the one time I'm glad I didn't hit my mark." His chuckle was weak, but his eyes seemed to brighten ever so slightly. "I'll be frank with you, Inigo. I may have no memories, but even I doubt I'm the one you're looking for. I don't even have a scar where you said you shot me at." She ran a hand through her head, not feeling any healed skin tissue protruding anywhere. "How can you be sure I'm the friend you're looking for?" The warm smile that unfolded on his face caught her off guard. There was mirth in his eyes. "Even my skooma addiction couldn't erase my memories of you, my friend. It has to be you. You have the same voice, even the same tail." He pointed at her odd fifth appendage. Azhu'ki's tail was slimmer than most Khajiits, and stranger still, it ended with a tuft of fur at the end like a lion's. No other Khajiit she'd met had a tail like hers. If what he said was true, then perhaps she was his long-lost friend. For some reason, that thought made her heart hum in elation. "If I am truly your friend, Inigo, then you should know I will not kill you," she said. The worry returned to Inigo's face. "But I shot you in the head and failed to kill me. You weren't in the right state of mind, Inigo. I can forgive that." She interrupted with a shake of her head. "I can't. I tried to kill you for a few extra septims in my pocket. No, let me die by your hand. I deserve it." Inigo dipped his head in a deep bow, as though waiting for her to finish him. Azhu'ki stared at him in silence. She let the quiet fill the cell till it was almost suffocating. She could see how Inigo trembled slightly before her. It was not out of fear, she knew. His guilt must have been immense. He wanted release from it, wanted to make peace with her. Hesitating for just a moment, she reached out to him and gently patted him on the head. He flinched at the contact, but she persisted and continued petting him till his fur flattened. "I will not kill a friend, even one I do not remember." Her voice was a whisper now. "But—" His voice trembled. She chuckled at him. "If you want to repay me, then come with me. You said we had a grand time on the road together, right? I want to relive that memory with you." Inigo's head snapped up, his eyes wide with wonder as he stared at her. "I fight with you?" She nodded her reply, shooting him a toothy grin. He beamed at her and stood up, towering her figure by a good several inches. "Or die defending you. Yes, this will do. I have a feeling that we will have a fantastic adventure together, my friend." His laughter reverberated with enthusiasm. It was an infectious sound, and she found herself laughing with him. "I'll hold you to that," she grinned. A flint of uncertainty still lingered in her mind, doubting the words this odd blue Khajiit was telling her. Both of them had damaged heads, messed up by one thing or the other. Their memories were not the most reliable. But her intuition had never failed her before. She felt as though she could trust this stranger, who looked at her like she was the dearest thing in his world. Even if they really were just strangers in the end, wasn't that how all friendships started? Even if she wasn't his long-lost friend, she could still be a friend to him. That would be fine by her. Inigo was quick to pack his belongings, all 6 of them. Into his knapsack he kept his bow, sword, arrows, journal, book, and the dragonfly holding jar. "Isn't this exciting, Mr. Dragonfly? I found my friend, and now the 3 of us are off for a great adventure." He smiled at the hovering insect before placing its jar inside. Azhu'ki tilted her head at him. "Is that all you have?" She pointed at his small bag. "I'm afraid so. I am not exactly blessed with an endless amount of septims to spend." Inigo slung the knapsack over a shoulder. "And, what about your clothes?" The blue Khajiit pointed at a chest at the far end of the cell. "I think I have a suit of iron armor in it." She raised a brow. Iron armor? Iron was a fickle metal. Crafted right, it was a sturdy protection against blade and arrow. If it was poorly made, it would warp and crack from only a few sword swings. She walked over to the chest and opened it with a creak. What she saw made her grimace. The armor, if one could call a rusty piece of junk that, was littered with countless cracks and dents. Worse still, the quality of it was absolutely basic. She could make a better armor blindfolded. With a sniff, she slammed the chest shut. "Wear this for now." She tossed a cloak from her knapsack at him. "I'll smith you some real armor." Inigo's eyes glinted in glee. "Oh yes, I remember you telling me you were a good blacksmith when we were still mercenaries." Azhu'ki winked at him, strutting out of the cell with a confident swing in her hips. "Good, my dear Inigo. I'm the best Khajiit blacksmith in Skyrim." She laughed and crooked a finger at him. "Come, I'll show you what I can do." With her giddy companion behind her, Azhu'ki led the way out. A few guards eyed Inigo with uncertainty, but a glare from her had them scurrying to check on the other inmates. "I wonder why they're being so skittish," Inigo said, walking up to her side. "Yes," she said innocently, "I wonder why." Skialang was there to greet them as they exited the jailhouse. Tail wagging, tongue lolling, the large husky snuggled his fluffy head against Azhu'ki's stomach. She smiled and fondly petted him. "Good boy. I have a new friend for you." She waved her tail at Inigo. "He's who I came to get, boy. Say hello." The husky gave an inquisitive sniff at the blue Khajiit. Azhu'ki watched, bemused, as her hound went stiff at the odd sight that was her new companion. Inigo similarly stood straighter, comically tilting his head to the side when Skiolang did too. It was a wordless exchange between the two males. They sized each other up, circling around as they did. This went on for a couple more minutes before Skiolang's posture slackened and the dog padded up to Inigo with a wag in his tail. The blue Khajiit likewise smiled at the husky and petted him on the head. "Yes, indeed, Skiolang. You are truly a war dog. I'm honored to travel with you and your master." Inigo grinned toothily, to which the husky replied with a bark. Both males turned to her then, content with their introductions. Azhu'ki nodded and led the way down. Skiolang took his place by her side. Inigo took the other one. It was a short walk to the scorched hammer, whose forge still burned bright in the darkness of the fading night. Most of the tools were kept away in baskets inside Balamon's house, but it mattered not to Azhu'ki. Placing her knapsack on the ground beside the forge, she pulled out a smithing hammer, a roll of paper, and some charcoal. "So," her eyes turned to Inigo, "I'll need you to lose the cloak for a bit." The blue Khajiit nodded, stripped to his loinclothes once more, and stood there with nary a hint of shame. He was perfectly still while Azhu'ki took his measurements, lifting his arms when she told him to, standing straighter when she said so. Her hands ghosted over the width of his stomach, eliciting a giggle from him. "Stop squirming," she snapped, rolling her eyes at him. "Can't help it, you have very light fingers," Inigo chuckled. Her tail waved rhythmically, gaze still focused on his torso. "It's a talent," she shrugged. She scribbled the measurements on the parchment, muttering jealously on about his height as she did. "This will do. Go ahead and put the cloak back on. Oh, and take a seat somewhere. This might take a while." Her tail pointed to the low stone wall of the marketplace, and Skiolang obediently went to sit by it. Inigo didn't need to be told twice, and took a seat next to the hound. "So, what armor is it you're making for me, my friend?" he said. Azhu'ki turned to him. Her eyes glinted boldly, maw curved into a devilish smirk. "You'll see." She pulled out an impossibly large amount of leather and iron ingots from her knapsack. "Where does that even go?" Inigo said in awe, and laid them about her. She paused then and listened to the crackling of the forge. The embers glowed bright and bathed her in a warm light, alighting her eyes with the fire that swam through the cinders. Smoothly she picked up one of the ingots and dipped it into the waiting embers. She observed the silver color of the iron turn yellow and red from the heat. She waited, counted to 60, and then took the metal out with a metal tong. She placed the heated metal upon the anvil, letting loose her heavy hammer upon the softened iron. Sparks flew as hammer met ingot. They whizzed dangerously close to her face, but the Khajiit Altmer didn't even flinch. She struck at the metal over and over, shaping it, thinning it, till it was a narrow strip. Several times did she plunge the iron back into the fire to keep it hot and malleable. Every time she swung her hammer, the arm muscles hidden beneath her pelt revealed themselves, a subtle reminder to any who saw, in this case Inigo, Skiolang, and a passing guard, that the lithe female was far from fragile. She toiled long as the night waned more. She had made a number of iron strips by then, and let them rest in the embers of the forge while she moved to work the leather. Azhu'ki weaved and sewed the leather she had traced and cut together with graceful speed, as though she were playing her lute. Some white cloth from her knapsack were put together with the sturdy material as she created the sleeves, the tunic, the pants, the boots. The heated iron was added shortly after. Azhu'ki's hands were quick as they shaped the iron into the shapes she wanted. By dawn, she had finished assembling all the pieces. She allowed herself a moment to breathe and took in the air of an approaching dawn. The sun would rise soon, she thought absently. Her tail flicked as she moved on to engraving the iron. Intricate curls and ivy-like swirls decorated the edges of the iron pieces. The pauldron she made took on the visage of a beast with open maw, holding on to the crimson cape it held in its fangs. She dyed some of the cloth with blue pigment. a tribute, she explained, to Inigo's unique pelt. Said Blue Khajiit could only marvel as she carefully assembled all the pieces together. Before the sun rose, the folk in Riften rising with it, Azhu'ki did some final adjustments on the buckles of the newly made armor's belt. "There," she said with a sigh, startling Inigo, who had begun to doze off. She waved him over, not containing the pride and excitement in her face as she did. The armor lay finished on a workbench, gleaming brightly at the Blue Khajiit who approached it. Azhu'ki grinned at the dumbfounded look on her companion's face. "This?" Inigo gingerly traced a hand over the fabric and metal. "This is incredible. I've never seen anything so well crafted in such a short notice." Azhu'ki puffed up her fur proudly. "I told you I was the best. Now go and put it on." She grinned toothily at him. She turned around, polite as she was, and waited as her friend shifted into his new garb. Her face was impassive, but her tail could not help but flick excitedly. "You can turn around now, my friend," Inigo eventually said. Taking a deep breath, Azhu'ki turned. Her eyes widened as she stared at Inigo. Gone was his loincloth, instead replaced by the armor she had made for him, and Mara did it fit him perfectly. The Blue Khajiit seemed to share her thoughts, for he did a little pose for her and looked happily at his garbs. "A perfect fit, my friend, and it's not so heavy. It does not even chafe my legs." Inigo grinned almost madly as he ogled every inch of the armor. It made Azhu'ki smile, satisfied. She was just thinking about heading to the Bee and Barb for some well-deserved velvet lechance when Inigo suddenly called out to her. "My friend," he smiled, and walked up to her. She did not have time to refuse, as she was drawn in for a big bear hug. "Thank you for this gift. It is absolutely wonderful." Had her heart been beating then, it would have been banging like a war drum. Physical contact without killing intent directed towards her was an almost alien sensation. She could forgive herself then, as she froze for a moment, her hands sparking in the beginnings of a flame spell. Inigo did not seem to notice the conflict his action had caused, for he pulled away, grinning, running to Skiolang to show off his new armor. The husky barked in agreement and sniffed at the cloth and iron. And Azhu'ki just stood there, still comprehending the hug she'd been given. "My friend," Inigo smiled as he and Skiolang went back to her. "Why don't we go to the Bee and Barb for some food? I may not have much coin, but I have enough for a meal for the three of us." His voice brought her out of the daze she was in. She gave herself a mental shake and smiled at him, tired, a bit confused, but grateful. "That sounds perfect. I think I need some of Talon Jay's drinks. He'll probably give us a discount, too." She walked with Inigo and her dog to the inn. Behind them, the sun's rays were beginning to seep through the sky. The rift was beginning to stir, with faint bird songs and insect tunes humming into the air. "Talon Jay gives you discounts? Kirava would never let him do that," Inigo said, surprised. Azhu'ki chuckled as she pushed the doors of the inn open. The two Argonians greeted her warmly, their matching rings gleaming as they waved the trio in. "Prepare to be proven wrong, Inigo." Her laughter echoed in the inn as they walked in, the doors closing softly behind them.